this Christmas was darker, less cheerful. But I still believed in Santa, in magic and miracles, and the hope that we could find joy again. But our village had given up on miracles and on each other. They had forgotten the spirit of Christmas, the sacrifice of giving. I tried to help them to believe again, but we were no longer the loving family I remembered. They too had given up. And eventually, so did I. I wished for them to go away. And that night, in the darkness of a howling blizzard, I got my wish.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to The Fear of God, a podcast exploring the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre. Hello and welcome to another fun-filled episode of The Fear of God. We are so happy that you are here. We are exploring every single week the intersection between faith and the horror genre, and having that exploration with you right now is Mr. Reed Lackey. Now, typically, one Mr. Nathan Rouse is also here with me, but he got some really bad news, and for those of you who are out here in the world, I'm about to give you some really bad news too. Nathan finally found out that there is no Santa Claus. And he was so upset. He was so outraged by the whole thing that this whole story had just been fed to him all of his life. And so he was so outraged by the whole thing, he just abandoned all of Christmas spirit. And so his friends told him that there was no Santa Claus, and so he just went out and he was like kicking over little, plastic Santas that he saw on people's lawns. He was slashing big Frosty the Snowmen with these tires or whatever. And to be honest with you, I haven't heard from him ever since. Like, I don't know if he's just if it was just such a blow that he's just decided not to return to the world of the common everyday man or what. I don't quite know, but he took it really, really hard. So I'm not really sure what the history of the show or the future of the show looks like now, but in the meantime, for what we've done before, we would really appreciate it if you could go and leave us a rating, particularly a 5-star rating, and a glowing review if you have that time. We greatly appreciate those of you who have done that. And if you have not done that, we would greatly appreciate you doing that. But in the meanwhile, I'm just going to kind of hang out here. I've got a little bit of eggnog. I've got a little bit of... Nathan!
Reed.
Nathan!
Reed.
What happened, man? You've got cuts...
Yeah, I mean, someone was talking about Santa and saying he wasn't real, and I was like, no, but he is real, and he's gotta be real. And I was just like, I know.
You know what? There is a Santa Claus, Virginia Rouse. There is.
Hey, Reed, you know what? Despite my mother's most fervent desires, really don't care for the Polar Express.
I see. Yes.
Feel like it wants to foist a new religion upon me.
Oh.
I watched Krampus and I was like, There is a Santa. It is real, and I'm fine with it, and I'm totally okay with it.
It'll do that to you. It'll do that to you. Speaking
and I
of,
wiped my eyes. I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself here.
So speaking of Polar Express, I've never been a huge fan of that movie, more for technical elements than narrative ones, although I do think it's a little clunky narratively. But last year, as part of our trip back to North Carolina, we went, there is a place, and I feel bad I didn't actually prepare to talk about this, but I forget the name of the city, but there's a city up in the mountains of North Carolina where they actually have the Polar Express. It's just an old Smoky Mountain Railroad, and they transform it every holiday season into the Polar Express, where they basically do the movie, and they play things out. The major beats of the narrative from the train standpoint is displayed. You get a little book that is the story. You get some hot chocolate and some commemorative mugs and everything. And so we did that as a family, and at the end, Santa comes aboard the train and goes and talks to all the little kids. And let me tell you, like, my little son having a conversation sitting there with Santa aboard the Polar Express, like, I was... There's some magic in all of those sorts of celebrations that, yeah, we don't necessarily have to get into all of that right now, but yeah, it was enough to make me to sort of endear the movie to me just for that experience, even though objectively I don't really care for the movie, but it was enough to just be like, oh, I'm glad it's there. I'm glad it exists.
Well, it's funny. I can't remember if we've talked about this in previous Christmas episodes, but we don't hold this against me if not you, Reed. We've had these conversations over the years, but listeners, we were real unsure parents about what we wanted to do about Santa, and initially sincerely played it down, and my mom got real mad at me, and it wasn't like we were explicitly just telling our children, no, this is a real thing, but we weren't elevating it either, and had some peer compatriots in this endeavor. And I'll never forget, like, I don't know, 4 years ago at this point, our children at a preschool event, Santa comes out. The preschool has hired a Santa. Yeah. And they're like, see, we told you. And I was like, fine, whatever. We're don't get mad at me in 30 years. But that said, I do feel much more on board with the wonder inherent, and it I don't know how y'all are, but it's a tricky conversation. I mean, on the way home from school today, my kids were bringing it up, and the figment or reality of it, and I dodged those questions, and it's like, what do you think? And then quickly change the subject and offer them ice cream. No, really, that actually happened.
That's how we handle hard conversations in the Rouse household. We just ignore them and throw sugar at
it. Here, have some sweets. Quick. Don't think too hard about it.
Quick, look over there.
Anyway. Hey, buddy.
Hey, buddy. Well, listen, man, next week is Christmas, and I want to...
goodness.
I know. We're normally going to, normally we say this at the end. We will say it again at the end of this, but this is probably your last week. If you have not yet done your homework, listeners, next week we are going to be... And this is the first time this has happened in the show. Our episode will drop on Christmas Day. So our episode will air on December 25th. So please, by all means, if you have not yet begun to read Charles Dickens' classic novel, A Christmas Carol, please acquaint yourself with that, because that is next week's episode. We are going to be talking about the text of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, not any particular adaptation of A Christmas Carol. You can, by all means, there's a 1,000 adaptations of it in various forms, but our episode will focus on the text. So if you've not ever read that, or have not read it in a long time, I would strongly encourage you to read it. Yes, most adaptations are faithful, but there's still a lot to the text that we'll probably be diving into. So it's very brief. Check it out. Do your homework, and we'll see you next week. So yeah, next week is Christmas, brother.
Jeez. Well, I don't know if you've said this yet. We are, in fact, it's cold in North Carolina, and so I don't know, maybe my ears are frozen shut. But we are at our favorite word here, our penultimate episode of our current series, What the Dickens. And Reed, dude, last week we hosted a filmmaker on our show.
Oh my gosh, we've never done that before.
Thank you so much to Chris Peckover, director and co-writer of Better Watch Out, for showing up, hanging out, offering some insight, and just participating in a really fun conversation. That was awesome.
Oh, absolutely. We had a lot of fun. We're really appreciative to him for taking the time, especially because it was short notice, but we had a really great conversation. Go check out that film and go check out that conversation. Check out the film first because we spoil everything. We spoil things about it that you do not want spoiled if you have not seen the film. But yes, please, by all means, go check out Better Watch Out and then listen to our conversation with Chris Peckover, a great guy, and we were really happy to have him on.
Hey, this is a random interlude that I didn't brief you for, but I'm kind of jealous of the fact that you're like wearing normal indoor clothes right now. So...
and you're out there in 20 below zero weather in North Carolina.
Well, it's not that extreme, but Reed, so I'm wearing like 10 articles of clothing right now, and I'm not totally. I'm wearing 2 pairs of socks.
Oh my god!
I'm wearing 2 pairs of pants. I'm wearing 2 shirts.
Oh my gosh!
A thin pullover hoodie and a large winter coat, and on top of that, I shit you not, I have a heating pad in my lap like an old lady.
All right. No,
I have a heating pad. My wife handed me a heating pad and a surge protector to go out to the garage.
All right.
So,
you are prepared.
I am. I mean, I wasn't prepared for this, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Sure. Well, by all means, let's get into it then. So before we get into our episode this week, which is going to be on Michael Dougherty's Krampus, Nathan, we have something else to discuss.
What you watching?
Oh.
What you reading?
Oh.
What you listening to? Read what you watching, read and listening to.
I love how it's all melodic and held out, and there's what you want, jumbling all those words into 3 seconds. Oh man. All right. Well, I'll go first. So I have 2 brief ones. I don't need to talk too much about it, but we, at the time of this recording, it's a little bit of time travel here at the Fear of God, as we're apt to do. It's earlier in December when we're recording this right now, and I just put up the Christmas decorations this past weekend and watched A Muppet Christmas Carol while doing that, and that was really delightful and wonderful, and I absolutely adore that film. That's one of my very favorite adaptations of the story that we're going to be covering next week. So I just wanted to mention that in passing, but I also watched a movie, and I'm gonna bring this subject up. The movie is divisive among Christians for some reasons that'll be apparent in a moment. But
is it Batman versus Superman?
Yes. Yes, it is. So I watched.
It's been a while.
It has been a while. So I watched a film that hit Netflix, and actually, I didn't think to look up the movie to know the director. It was a director that I wasn't familiar with, but the film is called Come Sunday, and it's on Netflix. Have you heard anything about this film?
No.
Okay, so I just watched this film. It stars, I'm going to butcher his name, but Chiwetel Ejiofor. And so it stars...
Oh, is this the Creflo Dollar movie?
Not Creflo Dollar, but...
Or what's his name?
You know
what I'm talking about.
Yeah, Carlton Pearson. Yes.
There we go.
So it's the movie about him and his... coming to an epiphany, believing God spoke with him, and shifted from the traditional fundamental evangelical doctrine over to the doctrine of inclusion, which is similar to the idea of universalism. He calls it inclusion, but essentially saying, no, there is no hell, everybody is saved. And the film obviously deals with some ideological problems, but the film, as I sort of received it, was more just about him and about him trying to cope with the fallout from his shift in his beliefs. And the film in some ways sort of played around in the extremities in a way that I think they could have nuanced some character beats a little bit better. But I was also surprised at how sort of full-bodied some elements and some people were portrayed in the film. But it's a fascinating, whether or not you agree with that ideological sentiment, I would recommend the film. I will put a little asterisk on it that the film is very deliberately paced, i.e., some viewers may find it slow. Yeah, exactly. But apart from that, I found it a very fascinating movie, at times very emotionally gripping, and particularly, Nathan, I think you would find it very interesting. So that's one of the things that I had just recently watched. Finally came around to come Sunday on Netflix.
Are you calling me a universalist?
I'm not saying anything. I said
those are theological fighting words.
I thought I said you thought that you'd like the movie.
I know. I'm just playing with you.
Anyway.
I might be. I don't know. It's funny. I wasn't gonna bring this up, but you're commenting on this made me think of. I reference it often, but the Bible for Normal People. I just listened today. Their most recent episode, Pete Enns, who is one of the primary hosts or one of the co-hosts on there. It was a solo episode of his, where he specifically spends an hour. I have not read this. I don't totally want to give them clicks, whatever, but there's a particular blog post out there that is heavily endorsed by some fundamental yet widely accepted organizations that he just sort of tackles. And not in a cynical, not in a combative, not in an attacking way. It's very sensitive. But it's just really, I don't know if you're like this. I think you are, though. I'll give you credit and presume you are. Just sort of, I like to think I'm bright. But when you listen to like a really smart person engage on topics that you at least find interesting, even though if you're not like totally understanding everything.
Sure, right.
Regardless, the most recent Bible for Normal People, I would encourage people to check out. Well, I'll say this. He's tackling a blog post that basically, I think the title of which was more or less the similarities between progressive Christians and atheists. So it's this real pejorative kind of piece that's like basically saying if you're a progressive Christian, you're one step away from being an atheist. And so you're commenting on Carlton Pearson's story is what directly made me think of that, because the author of this blog post would probably surely think he is an atheist or on his way to being one.
Right.
But that is not what I wanted to throw out there. I did want to comment briefly because we haven't on here yet. Both of us saw, I will bring up Fantastic Beasts 2. I don't know what we're calling it for shorthand. FB2 COG.
Yeah, it's FB2 COG.
BVS DOJ. It's fine. It's fine. I love the mind of J.K. Rowling and much of her narrative output in the world. Right now, I'm not a massive fan of these two movies. I am pretty interested in the story they're telling, and I really like aspects of them, but overall, without real intentionality on my part and multiple more viewings, I'm not like, these are awesome. So
right.
That's kind of my just sort of cursory opinion on FB2 COG.
I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I would. Fantastic Beasts, I was pretty excited for. I watched
the first one?
Yeah, the first one.
Right,
I was pretty excited for. I enjoyed it. And I just love the Wizarding World so much.
Yes.
And so any opportunity to sort of, revisit that world and sort of deepen the mythology, I'm completely on board for, very excited about. But distance and time have not been kind to Fantastic Beasts, just in terms of my wanting to revisit it, the first one again. My expectations were pretty curbed for Crimes of Grindelwald, and admittedly, I could acknowledge there's some complaints about it out there that I'm like, yeah, I kind of agree with that, but I actually wound up enjoying it a lot more, becoming a lot more emotionally invested specifically in the final third of it than I expected to be. And I will say, and this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but I was surprised by Johnny Depp. I felt like Johnny Depp delivered a much stronger, more subtle performance than I had seen him deliver in recent, maybe the last since the Pirates movies. So yeah, there was elements to it that I really appreciated. I still don't think they reach the heights of the core Harry Potter films, but there's some things I really appreciated.
And I should nuance that. I mean, I gave what seemed like a very half-hearted commentary there, and I suppose that actually isn't a really bad way to consider it. It's half-hearted. My heart is very much in it but I can't decide, to what level.
Sure.
And I'm anxious because I do think the story is strong. I think what the story that's trying to be told here is a very interesting one for fans of that world and that mythology. And I'm with you, dude. Like, it seems stupid, but probably about 5 years old now, if not maybe a little longer, but it's only really been on my radar for that time. Even just the stupid logo, right? The Wizarding World.
Oh, yeah, with all the
emblem.
wands.
Like, that's so awesome. Yeah, the wand that forms a book. Yeah, like, okay, that's awesome.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I just think, the movies could be a little better, but the story is pretty interesting.
Sure.
Regardless, that has been another installment of What You Watching?
Mm-hmm.
What You Reading?
Mm-hmm.
What You Listening to? Okay.
I thought you were going to finish off the little coda there.
I know. I was just try to keep you on your toes.
You sure do. You sure do.
I thought that might do it.
So, yeah, we are finally covering. It's really funny. We had a listener. I hope he still listens, but we had a listener who. I hope he still listens. I don't know if he does or not because I haven't heard him reach out to us in some time. But we had a listener who, when we did our very first Christmas and we covered Gremlins for our very first Christmas here at the Fear of God, we announced that we were going to be covering Gremlins, and we had a listener at the time that was like, "I'm just glad it's not Krampus." Not because he didn't like Krampus. He said he enjoyed Krampus, but at the time, Krampus was a recent film, and so everybody was talking about Krampus. And so, but it was because I think Krampus was only a year old at that point, and so lots of Christmas horror-themed things were, diving into Krampus. And it was like, I'm just glad it's not Krampus, blah, blah, blah. So, well, here we are, 2 years later. We are finally talking in this hashtag What the Dickens series. We covered Black Christmas for Christmas Past, Better Watch Out last week for Christmas Present, and now we are finally into, although it starts kind of in the present, I think it's a bit, time nebulous, particularly towards the end. We have Christmas Horror Future with Michael Dougherty's 2015 film Krampus. You had never seen this before, right?
I had never seen this before.
Had you ever heard of it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, I remember seeing trailers for it and thinking that looks stupid. Wow. Let it never be said that I am unwilling to eat crow.
I understand.
So, dude, I was affected by Krampus.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. She didn't ask me about it, but after the movie, I turn it off and I'll own it, man. I was a little teary at the end. And, just kind of, I felt like my innards were a snow globe. That's the imagery of the movie. And right. I'd been kind of shaken up, and, I was just much more kind to my wife, and I don't know, for the next 12 hours, I was very much in this, no, Krampus, you're not going to get me headspace.
Yeah. You even texted me the next morning, kind of to this effect. I won't say what you said, but yeah, to that effect of just, being very affected by.
Yeah. What did I say? Are you concealing something?
I'm not concealing anything. I just don't remember the exact wording. So.
I didn't know if you were I'll let you say it, but I'm I don't remember.
I don't remember. No, just something to the effect that you were more moved by it and affected by it than you expected to be. And,
yeah. So yeah, we'll get into particulars, but ultimately, I was very taken by what Krampus had to offer. The movie,
right?
Krampus the movie, right. Not the underworld king or whatever.
Sure. Well, one of the things that so this director has only directed one other feature. He's done a number of other smaller things. I think he's directed a couple of TV episodes and some short films, but his only other feature was Trick or Treat, but the R, instead of O-R, it's R with a little apostrophe. Have you heard of that film, Trick or Treat?
No, I don't think so.
Trick or Treat is great. It's an anthology film. Just to refresh listeners who may not understand what I mean, it means that it's a series of compartmentalized stories that are threaded together with a larger sort of frame story, but for the most part, it's a film made up of 3 or 4 smaller short films. And Trick or Treat is great. It was from 2007. Maybe there's a world in which we'll eventually get to it. That's likely. But Trick or Treat is wonderful. So I came in with a lot of like director capital, really liking that film and really wanting to see kind of what he had to give me. It's funny because the first time around, I was somewhat, I won't say ambivalent. Ambivalent is not the right word. I wasn't like enamored or bowled over by this film the first time viewing it. Tipping my hand a little bit.
Of Krampus or of Trick or Treat?
Of Krampus.
Okay.
Tipping my hand a little bit. This second time around, man, it sucked me in, held me, and I was very affected myself. I don't know. Maybe it's the different context in which I watched it. I don't know, but yeah, I have a lot now of praise to heap upon it, as it were. Why don't we just dive right into? I don't really have much in the way of trivial bits, which I guess I'll apologize to the listeners for. But there's not a lot that I uncovered. Oh wait, I lied. I lied. Did you hear the line? So this is for all my Calvin and Hobbes fans out there. Did you hear the line that she said that Max is not invited over to I forget which neighbors it was, but Max is not invited over to the neighbor's house because of the noodle incident? Did you catch that?
Yes, I don't have any context for that.
Yeah,
yes,
so she said he's not invited back over to the house for the noodle incident. I don't know if this was intentional. I really don't know. It's so specific. I think that it was intentional, but the noodle incident is a running gag in Calvin and Hobbes cartoon strips, that Calvin is not allowed to go certain places or do certain things because of the noodle incident. And
that's funny.
And in the run of Calvin and Hobbes, they never explained what it was or what happened.
That seems pretty direct.
Yeah, and then like in this film, they never talk about like what the noodle incident was. But yeah, I mean, I'm like that has to be like a call out to a Calvin and Hobbes thing. So shout out to all my Calvin and Hobbes comic strip lovers out there for the noodle incident.
Well, thank you for sharing your noodle during the bits.
No,
I mean, you did it. So this is not so much a trivial bit as just a fun little anecdote, or actually maybe a sad anecdote. I don't know, but this whole opening scene, like, is so like terrible.
Oh yeah.
And it reminded me of the world of, or it made me recall at least. You remember the Shelby Mall?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, taking me way back.
Mm-hmm. Well, circa 1999, there was a KB Toys in that mall. And your boy got some seasonal employment at the KB Toys.
That's awesome.
And no, it really wasn't, actually.
You're like, I hated it.
Well, see, up until that point, I worked through much of high school, and it was at a Christian bookstore because that was me. Even then, I was just a good little Christian boy, not like Carlton Pearson in his heretical ways.
Wow.
Not to be confused with Creflo Dollar, it's two different people. So I worked at KB Toys, and I have this astonishing recollection, especially we all know my ability to recall things, of that Christmas. And it was one of the first years Pokemon video games were big. And I remember these moms getting into it at the register because of the shortage of Pokemon video games.
Oh, no.
Like, I have this distinct memory of that. Anyway, so yeah, watching this sequence at the top of the film of what is, I guess, ostensibly meant to be like a Black Friday or just like a major pre-Christmas shopping spree that is just, you paint that in kind of a horror movie and all the slow motion, dreadful, terrible things people do in the name of consumerism. It's a pretty rough scene to watch. So I feel like I'm worried that the moment's going to come and I'm not going to have good words for all the things this movie made me feel. But if someone's like, Nathan's awful subdued, it's really just like, I'm a snow globe shook up and I don't know where to vomit all my stuff. So it's going to go on read.
Ew.
On pure, just like surface level stuff. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but the actor's first name is David, and it's
Dave
the
Koechner.
guy who plays Koechner.
Mm-hmm.
Reed, I know he's got a certain kind of talent that people continue to cast him, and I'm not even knocking that. Clearly, he appeals to a different. I cannot stand. That
Really?
guy when he
Really?
comes on screen. Yes, he annoys me so much.
Oh man, I like him quite a bit. That's interesting.
Really?
Yeah, I
Wow,
like him a
that's
lot.
interesting.
Yeah, I like him a lot. Now, part of it, I will
like Stranger Things 2, kind of like him, like a thing that's liked that
I liked Stranger
really
Things 2 a lot.
That really doesn't have merit to be liked. Is that what you're saying? I'm just kidding.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun while it lasted. You will never get to hear.
What the dickens?
So, no. Part of it, to contextualize a little bit, and now I'm remiss to remember the name of the podcast, but there was a podcast that was that I think has ended now because Dave Koechner was on it, and he, because of his schedule, was not able to continue to be on it, and I don't know what the podcast evolved into or if it just ended, but he was on it with another friend of his, and they were discussing being a dad, because Dave Koechner has like 5 children, and so but the podcast was about how, like being a dad, the struggles of being a dad, and just understanding parenting in modern context and stuff like that. And so listening to that podcast, I had always just sort of been like, oh yeah, here's a guy, he does a thing, and that's whatever. But listening to that podcast and just sort of hearing him in the reel strongly endeared me to him. So now that's
different. Yes.
And so like now, even if I see him in something and may have differing opinions or varied opinions about his particular performance or what he's doing, I see him on screen and I just go back to his time on that podcast and just really, really like him. I just enjoy him a lot. So yeah.
Yes. And I think he's just got a very specific performance lane he drives in.
Sure.
It's not one that I often, veer into.
Sure.
Regardless, that's random. But so again, real surface stuff. Did you notice Aunt, whatever her name is, shows up and she's like, Christ on a stick?
I did, and I thought, man,
yeah.
Oh man, Nathan Better, the call out to the Christs of King. So I was like, yeah,
well,
there
in this
it is.
case, the Christs of Krampus is non-existent, but there you go.
Wow.
Well, actually, okay, so backing up to David Koechner, this works against him. I can't stand in real life when people use the phrase, a shepherd's got to protect his flock. I really hate it.
Oh, man,
so
they used it like 7 times in this movie.
Yes, they do. And despite that, I still was incredibly endeared to this movie. Starting to... Well, what are some likes, dislikes you have?
Okay, so I think the opening scene, kind of tragic as it is really perfect for setting up sort of what this film is exploring. I think it's a pitch perfect sort of like, yeah, we're gonna this very lovely old Bing Crosby tune and juxtaposed to images of people like having to be tased because they cannot control themselves during Black Friday shopping, and so just all these different things and the sort of violence of it all. And for those who don't know and haven't seen the movie, it opens with a montage purely set to, silently set to Bing Crosby's It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas, but the images of people like trampling over everybody in a department store and culminating in one of our main characters like getting into a fist fight in a nativity scene. And so, yeah, it's this weird sort of, yeah, this is Christmas time, but there's a lot going on. I really think that's part of what sucked me in, is as I was watching this, I was like, oh yeah, we're really dealing with this whole what is Christmas and what should it be. I feel like the first 30 minutes of this movie, if you go into it knowing like, oh, this is a horror film, and the first 30 minutes is surprisingly like, I'm going to use the word sentimental, not to say that it's like saccharine or sugary sweet or whatever, but
it's not. Yeah.
There's a lot of sentiment at play in the opening 30 minutes of this film. And I love the moment with like the grandmother and Max, like some of those little touches. Mm-hmm. He asks if she still believes in Santa Claus and everything. And there's a tone that this film strikes right up top that is very disarming if you are expecting to go into some cynical, biting little, Christmas story. And, basically the premise, to give a brief summary, and then I'll bounce it back to you. The premise is that this family is getting together. It's not quite Christmas Eve. It's like the day before Christmas Eve, or I think it's the day before Christmas Eve, like the 22nd or 23rd. And so this family is getting together, but the family is pretty dysfunctional. And in fact, the sister shows up with the brother-in-law and all the kids, and they've brought Aunt Dorothy, who's pretty obnoxious and whatever. And there's a moment that I'll mention in that first 30 minutes in just a second. But they're getting together, and suddenly Max, who is a little on the older side, but still believes in Santa Claus and still writes a letter to Santa every year. Well, his cousins latch into that, and they really very much are like, okay, we're going to tease him for this, and we're going to make fun of him for, all of these sort of elements, these sort of things. And so they read his letter to Santa Claus, and obviously they're very mocking of him, but what he asked Santa for that year was things like for his mom and dad to fall back in love again, to help Aunt Linda and Howard, to help them get back up on their feet. He asked for a lot of very benevolent things. He asked for some very sweet things of Santa, and they ridicule him for it. And admittedly, when they're reading the letter, he's sort of, there's a somber tone that sort of washes over everything, but it quickly devolves into like they break out in a little fist fight and everything, and it all doesn't go well. He gets so upset that instead of mailing the letter to Santa, he rips it up and throws it out into the wind, unknowingly and accidentally summoning the spirit of Krampus, which is like the shadow of Santa Claus, who comes into people who have stopped believing in the spirit of Christmas, and basically claims them, if you will. So the remainder of the movie past that point is they're coming to an awareness of Krampus's sort of predatory nature of them and trying to defend themselves against him. That's the premise in a snow globe, as it were. So, and we'll get to that ending eventually, I'm sure. So, but that's the premise of it. That having been said, those first 20 to 25 minutes, again, just strikes a really different sort of tone. Even Aunt Dorothy, this is what I was going to mention earlier, even Aunt Dorothy, she comes in and she's griping and moaning every single step of the way about being there and having to be there and all of these frustrations. While she's griping about that and being frustrated by it, then the mom, played by Toni Collette, she just goes off on her. She's like, well, why don't we go to your trailer next year for Christmas? And then after you've spent weeks cooking and cleaning and preparing and getting ready to have company, I'll go in and complain about everything that you do, that you slaved so hard to work for. And here's what I like about it. Aunt Dorothy takes that. Like she recognizes like, oh crap, I've done, and she even says like, hey, wait a minute, like it registers to her that she's being, super cruel in her criticism and in her obnoxiousness about this. And it's little touches like that in this first half hour that I really appreciated this time around, because I think a different film would have just sort of dug into the cynicism of it and just would have made that another punchline or something. But this film is aware of the heart at which it's sort of driving towards. So anyway, that's just a couple of notes about that. And I really loved that. Everything that's tied into that, I loved that about this film.
What you just said made me think of, honestly, our guest last week, Mr. Chris Peckover. He was talking about archetypes. And I think you just sort of illuminated this really well. Like, this movie presents a very archetypal setup.
Right.
And yet, almost as soon as it kicks off the wall, starts to dive deeper and deeper away from those single-dimensional archetype setups.
Sure.
And I think you really nailed something there because let this never, ever be confused for a Hallmark Christmas movie, or Lifetime or whatever channel you want to pick.
Mm-hmm.
But the lack of cynicism is so profound. And I think maybe that's because the opening sort of Black Friday thing, I guess, yeah, you made a good point there. It's the first date you see on screen, I think, is the 23rd. So December 23rd. But the first moment I really got a taste of where the movie was trying to nestle emotionally is Max's pleading with his parents and family before the extended family shows up to watch Charlie Brown Christmas and wrap gifts.
Oh, yeah, right.
And this is what I'm talking about. it's stuff like that you're like, oh no. I don't know that I'm emotionally ready for where this movie may take me.
Sure.
And then you have the wrenching dinner table sequence.
Yeah.
Which again, you're playing with these very surface level archetypes, but starting to sort of barrel through the crust and enamel and into the deeper heart of. So here's a thematic idea that I don't necessarily want to unpack right now, but I just wrote this down a second ago. I said, in response to your kind of commentary about cynicism, I said, to me, the heart of this movie is, what if our emotional choices had consequences? What if the ways we interacted, whether it's walls we've erected or whether it's ways we've let ourselves be vulnerable, whatever, what this movie's kind of playing with, what are the consequences of these emotional choices we've made? And so I found that really compelling premise that I was totally unprepared for, because I was like, Krampus, what? Although, even before your recommendation, which holds a lot of weight, I didn't know Toni Collette was in it. I did remember Adam Scott being in it just from original trailers and stuff, but you don't get like someone like a Toni Collette if it's a real inch deep kind of piece.
Right. Yeah.
So that alone is a real sign of its ambitions, if not its execution.
Sure.
And then you have, on just a very technical level, I know I'm jumping all over here, but then on a technical level, in terms of likes, you've got that really lovely and fascinating animated interlude.
Oh my gosh, where the grandmother tells the story?
Yes.
Good Lord, I love that sequence.
Yeah. There's this great moment. So the grandmother that Reed has referenced, they call her Omi, which is probably like German for grandmother. But I
can't remember if it's German or Austrian, but it doesn't matter. But yeah,
something like that. Some European country. We're geography people here at the Fear of God. Well, it's Adam Scott's mother. She doesn't speak English 95% of her time on screen. Well, about 2/3 of the way through, once calamity is striking this family in a real profound way, she tells the story of her encounter with Krampus, and it cuts to this extended, think kind of Deathly Hallows and the Tale of the Three Brothers, this extended animated sequence. You like how I just did that?
I do. I like it.
In one episode. Happy Christmas. So it's got this really lovely extended animated sequence that, again, is just, you're kind of not prepared for what, at least for me, what you kind of thought the movie was going to be. It's like, wow, this is a really fascinatingly deep kind of story here. Again, so technical stuff, the animated sequence is great. The creature design is fantastic.
Oh yeah, no, it really is affecting, because it's kind of this, it's almost like a hunchbacked sort of mound of a beast with these huge horns, these antler horns coming out of its cloak. And when you get close to it, now something that I did not really recognize until seeing it the second time was this notion that it's actually, we never really see its true face. It's got this sort of
Krampus.
Yes, we never see Krampus's true face. It's got this sort of like twisted Santa Claus mask over top of its face, and so we get hints of it with like the eye and stuff, but we never.
Well,
really
it's got this
see...
real prolonged tongue too.
Oh my gosh, yeah, and so but
it hadn't occurred to me. Do you? And I'm not challenging you. It's just clicking with me that maybe you caught something I missed. But are you perceiving that? Because the most you see its face is when Max is challenging it at the lava pit or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Are you construing that is a masked visage?
That's what. Yeah, that's the way it looked to me, because it looks as if the sort of surface, what you would perceive as like the skin layer, is raised up and shadows a little bit of the eyes underneath. And so I mean,
it's so creepy.
I mean, I guess you could say, well, that's just what it looks like. That's just what its eyes looks like. But it sure caught, like in this time around, it appeared to me as if it was this creature of some sort wearing a mask, of which under it we see like the eyes and stuff. At least that's the way it appeared to me.
Is this your second viewing?
This is, yeah, I think Yeah, it's only my second viewing. I don't think I've seen this 3 times. This is only my second.
Well, and I don't even mean just the creature design as far as Krampus himself. Where one of the few dings I'll give the movie on a technical level is I just don't love the CGI gingerbread men. But that's it's not like this is terrible. It's just like, it's kind of a shame. There wasn't a better way to pull that off visually. But so to contextualize this a little for the listener, if you're not going to watch this, at the top of the movie, once the in-laws or the relatives show up, there's this giant Santa bag, gift bag on the porch that the relatives confuse for a delivery, and so they bring it into the home. Well, late in the movie, a fire breaks out inside the house. It's just chaos has ensued and crazy things are going on. Well, the aunt, thinking she's sort of trying to repackage or examine what was in that Santa bag and what she thinks were gifts that have been torched, you come to realize everything that was in that bag was a deposit of Krampus's. It's all these little, like, think of like little, gosh, how would you even describe this? Like, they're effectively minions of Krampus, but it's all these different forms. It's this like doll, baby-faced sort of bird-type creature. There's a giant Jack-in-the-Box. It's horrifying.
Well, yeah, you have like twisted sort of otherworld versions of all of the things that you would typically see, like twisted versions of elves, twisted versions of gingerbread cookies, twisted versions of, of that gigantic Jack-in-the-Box. It's like you have what would normally be perceived as like the elements of Saint Nicholas. You're now given sort of their macabre, otherworldly versions of them, and that's what's populating his bag.
One last surface thing, and then we can get further here. I cannot believe this movie is PG-13.
Isn't that wild? Yeah.
I don't understand the rating system sometimes.
I know.
I mean, I watch this movie. Now, I do understand it. I know some studio is like mass marketability. I want the 14-year-olds, kind of making out in the back row to be able to buy tickets to this movie. So yes, I get that. But in terms of tone, like if you really dial in on this movie's wavelength, I'm like, this is R. This is hard R.
Oh, yeah.
This movie is scary and it's devastating emotionally.
Well, what's interesting about that, one bit, I didn't mention this in Trivial Bits, but one bit of knowledge I've gleaned over time is just that, specifically citing the beginning of our What the Dickens series, Black Christmas, and another film from the 80s called Silent Night, Deadly Night, the studios were very reluctant to back Krampus because they're like, dark Christmas does not work. It usually is not a box office success. And the reason that they finally said yes was, we'll make it PG-13. They said, we'll obtain the PG-13 rating, and they're like, okay, people will probably be more inclined to come see a PG-13, even if it is dark and macabre. And so that the fact that they pushed for that rating, it makes me wonder, especially because Trick or Treat is an R-rated movie, makes me wonder if Michael Dougherty wanted to go for the R, but couldn't get the film. I don't know this. I'm supposing a little bit. What I know is that Universal greenlit it on the PG-13 premise. And so they had to possibly scale back certain things. But you're right, like it's still a tremendously dark and it's emotionally drenching in places, which is surprising. It's essentially a horror comedy, but it's emotionally drenching.
But say, and I'm not, again, like a minute ago, I'm not even like challenging what perhaps is the category, but I think it's much more. I would not, on its surface, having watched the whole of it, call that comedic whatsoever. Though I do understand, I guess black comedy perhaps. But let me real quick sort of contextualize the rest of the story, because people are like, "Oh my God, what is wrong with Nathan?" This happens every now and then. So, as Reed alluded to a minute ago in his summary, the character Max, who's probably about 11-ish, shreds his Santa letter, hurls it out his upstairs bedroom window because his family is at each other's throats. And it's sort of all the stereotypical kind of ways families interact at holidays. Well, unwittingly, his having done so invites Krampus to his neighborhood. And so progressively from that moment on, things get more harrowing as they go, until ultimately, one by one, of this dozen or so characters, everyone's getting picked off for various reasons, both slightly comedic and somewhat ominous and scary, until Max is the literal last character left, which, even watching it, you're like, of course, that makes sense. He's the one who, knowingly or not, set these events in motion. He's the one who needs to have the hero's moment. And he comes back and he challenges Krampus, while Krampus and all these dark minions are, kind of having this perverse kind of carnival in the snow. And he challenges Krampus and he's like, it's my fault, give everyone back, take me. Well, Krampus opens up, I mentioned a minute ago, this kind of lava hole or whatever. He opens up this kind of hole in the earth, as it were, like in the ground. It's got this lava look to it. And maybe, I don't know about you, and we're right up at scares here, so feel free. But to me, one of, amongst a myriad of the scariest moments in the movie is Max makes this real tearful entreaty, please, give them back. It's my fault. Take me.
Right.
And Krampus, like the carnival, the freaky carnival has silenced. Krampus with this long fingernailed finger, kind of procures the tear from Max's face. You think, and I don't know if you felt this way, as a viewer, you're like, oh, is the Krampus magic about to happen? And this is how you kind of reverse the spell by pure sort of contrition, that kind of thing. Well, he takes this tear and starts laughing. And then all the dark minions start laughing too. And then, I don't remember, there may be another beat or two here, but ultimately throws Max into this lava pit. And it kind of fades to black and cuts to a scene of Max waking up. And here, this is what, because on this PG-13 or R kind of, straddle here, I kept thinking like, this is a bloodless sort of movie that's happening. Like literally you're not seeing any blood, and are these people being killed or not? It's hard to know. Right. So it has this very kind of Hansel and Gretel type vibe to it. It's kind of fairy tale sort of feel.
Sure.
Okay, now Max is going to wake up. It was all a dream to teach him how to appreciate his family, which is exactly what you think is happening. He comes downstairs. He sees all the family together and warm-hearted towards each other in this den, and gifts, I think, are being opened. But regardless, it's just very warm, Hallmark type scene. And he sits down between his parents. And you can tell as he sits, the longer he sits, and the camera kind of hangs on him while all this sort of, revelry is happening around him. The camera hangs on him and his face starts to turn, in this kind of sad way. And this moment happens where quotes of his from earlier in the film start playing in his head. And then the camera starts pulling out, and each individual character.
Let me pause here real quick.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The only element you're leaving out is he opens a box and it's the Krampus bell.
You're right.
Thank you. Is in there. Yeah. And that's what starts what you're saying.
Yes. Some imagery from throughout the film is Omi has this little bell, a little jingle bell type thing, but it's old and weathered with the word Krampus and I suppose the full name of Krampus written on it. He is given a gift in this sort of dream sequence thing, opens it, it's the Krampus bell. That's when these quotes start reverberating through the characters' heads. Camera starts panning out and everyone starts hearing their own kind of quotes from earlier. And it's this real like heavy moment because the whole room turns, camera pans out until, as we've alluded a couple times, you learn these people are in a snow globe. The long nailed Krampus hand places the snow globe on a shelf amongst a plethora of many other snow globes, and it keeps pulling out, and they're everywhere.
Yeah.
And honestly, the people in a snow globe thing had less impact on me than some of the more just emotional beats there. But I wanted to contextualize a little bit because some of this feeds into scare stuff. I feel like I'm barreling past where things you might have. Is there anything you want to throw in here?
Well, in terms of scares, I'm just going to mention a couple of things in brief. I think, first of all, I was not expecting Beth, Max's sister, to exit so early. So her exit, like pretty much right up top, before anybody understands what they're really up against. She's gone because she had walked down the street to try to connect with her boyfriend. One thing that I don't think we mentioned is they wake up the next morning after Max had ripped up the letter, and like all the power's out, and none of the neighbors appear to have any power either, and everything. And so the sister leaves to trot down a few blocks to her boyfriend's house to see if she can connect. Well, she never makes it there, and then on the way back, she gets sort of in a very scary sequence, gets sort of claimed by Krampus. Again, at this point in the film, we don't really know what's really going on. So her exiting so early, really just like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, and it pivots very quickly what you were expecting from the film. The other thing that I will say is just like a big blanket scare is the attic battleground.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Just everything. They make it up to the remaining family members make it up to this attic, and there are all of Krampus's minions are like, sort of attacking them.
Well, that's those twisted toys. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This gigantic Jack-in-the-Box, a twisted sort of angel
terrible
figurine. Oh my Lord, yes. So, oh my gosh, I got to tell you though.
Yeah.
We'll pivot right back into it. So you and I went to Halloween Horror Nights last year. I also got the chance to go this year, but the year before that, my very first year going, I actually, and listeners can go back and listen to the very, episode, a bonus episode after episode 10 of The Fear of God is my time at that Halloween Horror Nights where they had a maze dedicated to Krampus.
No.
Oh, man, dude. And I don't know yet, but I might play me going through that maze as a bonus at the end of this episode because, oh my goodness. Yes. But it was terrifying. I mean, it was really, really scary. And the design was really impressive. And so it's partially scares, partially, likes, dislikes, to say, like, I just really love the look of the film. I love the look of everything, the way all of the creatures are designed, the way all of the scenes play out, even something as subtle as like when Dave Koechner, I'm not remembering his character's name, and Adam Scott, Howard. Sorry. Howard and Max's dad arrive at the boyfriend's house when they're searching for Max's sister, and just the way the whole room looks, like the way it's all blown out and the way certain things, there's frost on everything. It looks fantastic. It just absolutely has a great production design to it overall. But yeah, as far as a blanket scare, that attic sequence at about the 2/3 mark is just perilous. It's really terrifying.
Well, I mean, it starts with that, like they enter the attic and it starts with a giant mandible-mouthed Jack-in-the-Box devouring one of the characters, and it is dreadful because I think you've gotten glimpses of Krampus at that point, and you've seen the little gingerbread men, which are cutesy. That's the first real like monster viewing.
Yes,
and it is.
It's
potent. Well, I got caught up in my own storytelling there. I was trying to establish just sort of the context. So, all these characters effectively are in a snow globe. Well, that's what has happened, is a blizzard type thing has hit this little neighborhood in their street and whatever. Well, there's this snowman army, this like deformed snowman army that keeps encroaching closer and closer to the house. That's terrifying.
Oh, it's nightmarish. Oh yeah.
Scanning real quick. The snowman army, the creature design, the monster, and the Jack-in-the-Box, the menagerie of monsters, the dark ending. Are you okay to start walking towards themes?
Yeah, please. Yeah, let's go right in. And I know you have a lot of thoughts on this movie, so I'm gonna defer to you.
Again, I'm just gonna vomit some stuff and mop up the floor.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So the moment this movie started to... Okay, so you've got Sentimental Max talking about Charlie Brown Christmas and wrapping gifts. And that starts playing the strings of my heart of like my children and thinking about what are ways that I stifle wonder in them, So that starts there. And then you have that really heavy sort of dining room table sequence, which again, if you're talking about just subverting archetypes, this is just what is in every movie. It's Home Alone. It's all these different scenarios of like the chaotic, frenetic, no one's connecting, everyone's at each other's throats dinner table sequence. But because of kind of what you feel about Max so far, you're kind of bought into his little emotional journey, and it just goes real sideways. because ultimately what he's after is real heartfelt and significant. Well, then he shreds his stuff. And so then these calamities start happening. And so the monsters in the attic take place. Well, then one of the final climactic action sequences is, so there's a couple of distinctive groupings here. One is the toy monsters, and then there are actual like elves. And I think even Omi says it, doesn't she? She says elves, or the elves are here or something. Well, the aunt Reed referred to earlier has started to show some courage and vanquishes some of these toy monsters. Well, then the whole wall of the den bursts in, and these demented dark elves burst through. Well, and you've already sort of been conditioned. Okay, they're taking characters out. I don't know what's happening to them or where they're going or if this is going to be reconnected, but they are taking characters out. Well, yeah. Then the 10-month-old baby gets picked up by a dark elf, and amidst all this cacophony, and the parents aren't even quite aware it's happening, you hear the baby crying, gets taken out of the room. And that's when I started to just be like, oh, God help me.
Right.
And then so it gets down to the aunt and one of her children of 4, I think. Yeah. So the last leg of the movie is the aunt, who's played by that wonderful actress whose name I don't know, but is in Fargo season 2.
Allison Tolman.
There you go. Thank you. Great actor, really endearing role. She's Toni Collette's sister in the movie. So she and one of her kind of teenage kids, and Toni Collette and Max. Well, they're running through this kind of field of snow. It's real dark, and the aunt gets pulled under, and you're like, oh no, like they're taking the moms. Like this is, my God, it's Garrett and Better Watch Out saying, I want my mom. And the cousin and Max climb into a truck bed, and Toni Collette is shoving them in, and she has some final words for him that I can't recall. Well, she gets taken. Now, while the mothers are getting taken, they're playing this real melodic, sweet Silent Night. And it is devastating.
Yeah, it really is.
So all of those things are like playing on me. And it can't be ignored, this undercurrent of why are these actions happening? They're happening because of people's it's not just plot. It's these characters buy-in, it's the buy-in to, well, this is just how it is. Adam Scott basically says that to Max. Like Max has had the blow up at the dinner table. He comes up and is like, well, you just love them because they're your family. No, he's not glib like I just said that, but there's almost, that's what I mean, this buy-in. If there's cynicism anywhere in this movie, it's there, not in his statement, but in this undercurrent of, it just is what it is. This is how Christmas is.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe at the end of it, why I was so caught up and sort of caught in this undertow is there's Christmas how it is, and there's Christmas how it ought to be. Mm-hmm. And this is what I mean by this movie kind of presents the consequences of our emotional choices. Like we, for better or worse, we choose to beat the hell out of each other on a shopping spree for stuff. We choose to ignore the mountains of plaque like on a tooth of family dynamics and relationships in favor of just getting through the next 2 days.
Right.
Like we choose those things. We buy in to not dealing with it.
Right.
Because we want the photo, we want the Christmas card, we want just to kind of be able to say, well, we spent that time with them. And I really don't know. I'm worried I'm going to like any thematic stuff you have. I'm just going to like snowplow it.
No. Go right ahead. But
So as I am prone to do sometime, I just wrote this little like whatever here. And the phrase I thought read was, what you watch at the end of this movie, towards the end of this movie, is the snowy wasteland of unextended grace. Like, I am not a believer. I've drifted far enough away from this, if I ever fully was, in eternal conscious torment. It's really funny that Carlton Pearson comes up in this episode. I'm pretty shaky on a literal embodied Satan figure, but I believe very deeply in our capacity to create hell around us by the cumulative effect of unextended grace. And, you know, we talk, the phrase echo chamber has come up a lot in the last couple of years in terms of social media and our seeing the effects of it and who we talk to and what we talk about. And like, the end of this movie is the final result of the echo chamber notion.
Yeah.
That is a non-permeable, isolated wasteland of only those you want around you, in which you are cut off from a truer, more beautiful reality that does, as Omi says, require sacrifice.
Yeah.
And compromise and effort, but that contains in it, unlike the snow globe of our own designing, contains in it the capacity for wonder, for grace, for love, and for surprise. And, you know, I came away from this movie with just kind of teary and like, cool, let's do Santa. Let's have it all. Because the question I kind of forced myself into was like, is Christmas, is the birth of Jesus, is the Immaculate Conception, is Santa anything other than a fierce, forced human will to hope? You know, like, because without it, we're all just in our little snow globe and it's desolate. Like this word wasteland, I couldn't escape.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a really random insertion here, and I understand that it's going to take a moment to unpack it. I was listening to a podcast recently with a host, this woman named Whitney Phillips, who's a doctor or has her doctorate and studies online behavior, specifically trolls, online trolls, and which is really fascinating in a movie about Krampus and his dark elf trolls.
Right.
And she says this thing in this podcast read that I wrote down is just this little throwaway sentence that she means as a throwaway sentence. But I heard it and I was like, oh my God, that's the gospel in everyday life. She's her whole thing is about the intersection, the bouncing off, the overlapping of media as it exists in our world, journalism and trolls. And I'm not unpacking this whatsoever other than to simply say, picture two snow globes that continually kind of glance off each other, and these two things never interact, though they keep wanting to subvert each other. One wants to shed light on the other, one wants to overtake the other. The sentence she said, Reed, that was intended as just kind of throwaway. She says, I think the only way out is a different way entirely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you look at a movie like this, which may have much more. I may be reading much more into it than Michael Dougherty intended. I don't know. But you have this movie where we're just doing the thing that we've decided to buy into because it's what we've all decided corporately to buy into.
Right. Right.
And it shows us the natural endpoint of that, which is, all right, well, you got your people. You have your tribe.
Yeah.
And that, by the cumulative effect of the decisions and emotional choices you've made, is all you will ever have. And is there more a hell than only people that look and act like you? Like, that the only way out is a Christmas, is a birth, is a hope that is superhuman and unnatural and above and beyond and below and beneath and all around us. And that way is entirely different than anything we think we are going to put our hands to just sort of cook the dinner or give the gift or receive the gift or put up the tree. All those things are good and fine. I'm like really just going off here, so please jump
Yeah,
in at any
no,
point. But
no.
you know,
I'm just letting you do it.
all those things. What'd you say?
I said I'm just letting you do it. Go
I
ahead,
thought you said, yeah, that's just something you do. I'm like, oh,
No.
well, all right. You know,
No,
my
no, no,
reputation
no.
precedes me.
No.
I don't know, man. It just hasn't left me that we just. What's fascinating is the Krampus figure in the movie doesn't even really seem that. You can correct me on this or nuance this. I'm just sort of freestyling here. Doesn't even seem that malevolent. It's almost like, well, this is the choice you made. You kind of invited me here.
Right. Anyway. There's a playfulness to Krampus that is, of course, somewhat twisted, but he doesn't just like go for the jugular on them. Like there's a sort of a layered predation that he builds in, and again like a playfulness. Like he doesn't just go after Beth. He hops around on the rooftops and lets her see him, and then plants the other thing that's gonna consume her instead. I think so. You're scratching at a lot of interesting things here.
I never know if you're like, oh my God, Nathan.
No, of course not. No, I mean I love your phrase, the wasteland of unextended grace. Like I love that idea. So I'm gonna mention something that I brought up, or that I sort of uncovered in my preparation for the film, and then I'll but first I'm gonna sort of respond a little bit to what you're talking about. I think that this notion of there's two ways that I receive what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way that we could call this is a bit reductive to what you were scratching at. There's a way that we could call just status quo maintenance.
Right.
Like you deemed it, this is what we've bought into, so this is just what we're doing.
Right.
And I think that a lot of times status quo is just kind of where people reside, where they're not interested in trying to connect or love or appreciate the people in their little sphere. This is just, we're going to paint the numbers. We're just going to go where we've always gone and do what we've always done. This is the rote sort of behavior that we exhibit every Christmas season. Like Max's letter to Santa is heartbreaking.
Yes.
Because it's so beautiful. This notion that if it had never been read at the dinner table, obviously the plot would have gone a whole bunch of different places, but if it had never been read at the dinner table, think about that. This kid basically reaching out, it's a prayer. Like say what you will about the connections between whatever, it's a prayer. He lists out this kind of prayer-like letter, and there's a moment at which, and this is what's really tragic about it, there's a moment at which he no longer thinks that will do any good, and that is now become a moment of mockery for him. And I grieve for any and every of us. So I had a moment. Wasn't expecting to talk about this. Hopefully this will be found relevant by the listeners. So as we're recording this, it was not long ago that 41st President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, passed away. And when he passed away, there were immediately, I listen to politics podcasts, and all kinds of people were talking about this, little tributes and stuff like that. Lots of very affirming and sort of glowing tributes to this man that, in hindsight, to our current political climate, has come to apparently be deemed very, a man of sort of another time, like very gracious, and, even people who disagreed with him tend to like him, whatever. And man, Facebook can get ugly. Facebook can get very ugly. So I'm hearing all of that for like a day and a half, 2 days after he passes away. And then suddenly I'm scrolling, and I won't give too many particulars because it's a mutual friend of ours. But I'm scrolling, and all of a sudden I see a mutual friend of yours and mine, Nathan, post, paraphrasing here, I'm so sick of all this crap of people paying tribute, glowing tribute to President Bush, and then rattles off these list of things that he had done wrong.
Right. Sure.
And I had this moment that, like you with your reaction to Krampus, that I didn't know how to describe. But this is going to be violent imagery, but it is not far off what happened in my heart when I saw that. Not because of who it was, but because of what was being said. It was like you took my hope and my optimism, dragged it out behind the barn, and shot it in the face. That's very violent imagery, but I was so arrested and upset by that level of derision being hurled at a dead man. And where it brought me to in this, I was trying to sort of unpack it with my wife and talk to her a little bit about like just sort of my feelings about those kinds of things. And this is why I'm bringing it up here. You talk about the wasteland of unextended grace.
Yeah.
And you have just put words, I think very appropriate words, to what I was feeling. I was staring down the barrel of a place where none of us get any grace anymore. I was staring down the barrel of, this man is dead and gone. Can't think whatever you want to think about what, and it just coincidentally happens to be a former president. That's purely coincidental. But this man is dead and gone. All that he ever was is written in the history, and there are people privately who probably suffered greatly by decisions he made, and people who privately were probably made richer, better people because of decisions he made. And we, by breaking people down into a binary, you're this or period.
Yeah.
We do not extend grace. We don't do it even, and this is what was so upsetting, we don't do it even when they're dead and gone.
Right.
So Nathan, I know we don't do it while they're here. I know we don't.
Right.
We won't even do it when they're dead and gone, so we won't be willing to do it across the dinner table or across the aisle.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, and I could see an easy another 45 minutes here, so buckle up, people. It's funny you say that. Around the time of Billy Graham's passing, I really wrestled a lot because I was seeing LGBTQ peers posting of how some of Graham's decisions, actions, behaviors, attitudes had damaged them, and it really sort of caused a lot of pause in me. And I think you are correct in what you are describing, and this is why the format of social media, and it feels like such a dead phrase, but is so counterproductive just in so many ways that are meant to be good in us as humans, is that, I mean, is the best version of a life not learning to live in that tension? It's learning to live in the tension between who we are and all the broken, really ugly ways that is, and who in our best moments we are really trying to be and wanting to be and striving to be. And hear me, like, I don't know enough about Bush Sr., who just passed away, to have any real opinion. And I don't really, this sounds glib, I don't really care. It's not that I don't care about him. I just, like, that's just not a totally interesting conversation. But what you're after is interesting, which is, yes, the foghorn, the bullhorn of social media, which is a stupid platform that is the personification in the world of the wasteland of unextended grace.
Yes.
Is our ability to just be so reductive and so summarize a person by their worst things. And I want to try to tie this all together, not towards an ending per se, but towards a like cohesiveness. Two thoughts. One, so much of this movie's consequences are a result of Max shredding his note. And I think in the spirit of the emotional consequences of our actions, or the manifest consequences of our emotional actions, there's a difference here. There's behavior, and then there's emotional activity, inner life. How do you position yourself? So what happens to Max? He gets devastated. He gets stomped on. He gets emotionally. He gets run through the ringer by his blood relatives. And what does he do? He shreds what you might call his dream, which feels a little rote. But then you have Omi throughout the movie, keep the fire hot.
Mm-hmm,
What happens when the fire goes out? Krampus shows up and takes
He comes down. Right,
well,
right.
Is there a better definition in terms of our inner life than the fire? Like, keep that inner self, keep those embers stoked. It doesn't mean it's going to be roaring out of control or roaring whatever nonstop. It just means you have to maintain that, so that thus when we put out our fire, as Max does to himself, we become prey. You use that good word, predation, in terms of what Krampus does. Krampus is just, he's just there doing what he does. Like, you almost can't fault him. And this is what I mean by the cumulative effect of a negative inner life in concert with those around us. And this is where Christmas is such a punch through the walls of reality.
Right.
Because it's sort of saying there can also be a cumulative good.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to, I want to be careful here, because by no means am I saying like the presence of Jesus in our life is because a result of our good having been done.
Right.
It's
no,
not.
Right.
But I think this is random, and it may seem odd here, but it's something that's been it's been the fire in me lately. I think there's a big difference between a cognizance of Jesus and even what many would articulate as a following of Jesus and an embodying of Jesus.
Right.
So I think there's a real difference, and maybe books to be written on the semantics of following Jesus and embodying Jesus. And I think, as you quoted a lovely passage last week that always is real meaningful to me when I hear it, and that's, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, and that when I was a man, I put away childish things. And I'm going to challenge you and I here as men, as adults, as fathers, as husbands. Like, I don't think putting away childish things as a man means don't engage childlikeness. I think it means embody good.
Mm-hmm.
Embody Jesus. Embody, so that cumulative effects, and we're not going to get it right all the time, by no means.
Right.
But the cumulative effects of hope-bent interior choices create good in the world. Stupid things like, I have a peer who I knew had a sensitive Thanksgiving afoot. And I reached out the day after. And Reed, I say this not to pat myself on the back. I don't do things like that. I'm not that thoughtful.
Right. Yeah, I hear you.
I'm that thoughtful to like two people. One of them is you.
No, I know. No,
like I'm not that thoughtful. But as I'm trying to put away childish things and let myself be an embodiment, it forces you to say, okay, well, what are ways to accumulate a goodness about one's life and oneself and into the world? I know this is like really weird, just like rabbit trails we're following here, but
no, I mean, I understand. What we're really scratching at, and I mean, there's a mountain of things that could be said about this, and so maybe we can begin to wind down, if only for the fact that this conversation should never end. Not about the subject of Krampus, but like, this is, that we don't have to wrap a bow on this conversation. This is something that, as we enter into this holiday season, recapturing the wonder of the incarnation, recapturing the wonder of the spirit of this season, may be as simple as saying, no, I need to constantly recapture the childlikeness, not childishness, but the childlikeness that is present for me. There's another passage of scripture that I could read the greater context in which it exists, because I think that it is, that obviously there's value to that, but I just like the phrasing of Titus chapter 2 and verse 11, which simply just says, "For the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people." Just very simply, we're talking about this the wasteland of unextended grace, and our choice that's ahead of us is basically, will we continue striving for what is good and right and hopeful and wondrous about this season, or and about the world? We're talking next week, and this is when we'll get into this, but we're talking next week about A Christmas Carol, and that book uses the word and the season of Christmas in ways that could and should be applied in greater contexts. One of Scrooge's basic promise at the end is, I will honor Christmas in my heart and keep it all the year. Well, it's just a day, it's just a season. But what he's scratching at is there are elements of this season that should saturate my very being. And I would say the same thing about this notion of grace and this notion of reaching towards goodness and reaching towards hope and reaching towards forgiveness and reaching towards understanding, all of these things that should saturate every fiber of who we are, not just be encapsulated to a singular context of this time or place or relationship. I think we should constantly be striving towards allowing that. We should constantly, obviously, see what I'm about to say as metaphor, but we should constantly be bugging people to watch Charlie Brown's Christmas and wrap Christmas presents.
Yes.
We should come in different contexts.
And I know I'm getting ahead of us here, and I'm probably stealing some of your thunder for next week, and I don't want to do that except to make a point here. What is devastating about Krampus, this movie, is it states there is a ceiling on your capacity to choose to bend towards good. And your opportunity will end.
Yes.
And be finite. And the gloriousness of a story like A Christmas Carol is to say there isn't. And,
right.
And you will, that opportunity is available whenever. And I'm not even preaching, because what I'm trying to articulate isn't there's an opportunity to follow Jesus in this life, and that opportunity will never end. That may in fact be true. What I'm trying to articulate to those who have ears to hear is there is never not an opportunity to embody Jesus into the world, because you talk about incarnation, and I think if there's anything we take away from incarnation, it's that we are it as well, and we put it forth as well, and observing the way we've always done it is buying into the system, choosing to alter the system, choosing to, as Whitney Phillips on this podcast says, find a whole other way out is our work. And that is the fire we have to keep hot.
Right.
Lest we just get overtaken by the minions.
So sit with that, listeners, and then I'm about to, what I hope will be, raise Nathan's spirits tremendously. So I mentioned in passing earlier, I'm going to say this, and then we should wind it down and go to our friend. I found in my research that there was a correlative comic book called The Spirit of St. Nicholas, or The Shadow of St. Nicholas, that was released in conjunction with Krampus, written by the director. So this ending, this snow globe ending, has sparked two threads of fan theories. One, and predominant, is exactly what you and I just alluded to. It's the reading you got from the film. It's the reading I got from the film, which is they're stuck. They are forever doomed to be in this snow globe repeating Christmas morning in some sort of twisted, perverse eternity. Okay? There is another fan theory that says the snow globe was merely Krampus's window into keeping an eye on them to make sure Max kept his promise, tying that back to Omi, and, basically as if that Krampus will constantly sort of be watching out for them to make sure that they cherish what they've learned and what they've gleaned along the way. Well, the director has refused, understandably so, to resolve the tension for those two fan theories. But, and I have not read it, presumably that comic book tilts the interpretation into the direction of a window into watching over them versus they're trapped forever to repeat Christmas morning in some sort of twisted, eternal, construct. And again, we're just going by the text of the film, as it were. So take of that what you will. But I wanted to end your train of thought, which I think is really substantive, with a little nugget of hope that maybe even in the shadow of St. Nicholas, there is, a hope for second chances with sacrifice, and we'll get into all that much more in next week. Please go read Christmas Carol, everybody. You'll be better for it. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to consider here, and I think, again, we could talk about a lot more, but I think that's a good time, if you're okay, to go ahead and bring in our good friend old Krampus S. Pumpkins, or David S. Krampus.
Jeez, I got a lot of questions.
So we're going to do something a little different. 2 weeks ago on Black Christmas, we kind of threw Nathan a curveball. And then last week, because we were talking to the director, we weren't going to dare rate his film right in front of him. Hopefully you all understood that. But what we're going to do now, and probably for the foreseeable future, is instead of giving, because, we just constantly landing on sevens, instead of doing a united metric for David S. Pumpkins, Nathan and I are going to still measure these films by style, scares, and substance, but we're going to give you individualized ratings. So Nathan will give it a score, and I will give it a score, and then you may take that for what you will.
Well,
so,
and to unpack that a hair, I'm sorry to cut you off rudely there. To unpack that a hair, most people who've been following us for some time appreciate David S. Pumpkins. We love David S. Pumpkins and want to figure out a way for him to continue. And Reed will be quick to say, Nathan, this is all your fault, and I'll own that. But as an idea, using David S. Pumpkins on the show is meant to be like, hey, what's the fear of God metric on a given episode? And the longer we've sat with it, the more we've got the same rating over and over. The more, and hear me, y'all, I'm almost 40 years old. It takes me a long time to learn stuff. So, I'm owning that. I was telling Reed recently, more as, hey, I'm such a dummy for this not having clicked earlier. Like, we're naturally picking stuff to cover that we're going to lean towards liking, which makes sense that most of our ratings are favorable. You're gonna have your Mays and your Raws, which I'm not gonna be real fans of, that Reed might be, but overall, most stuff we're gonna be pretty favorable to. But we didn't want to completely jettison the Pumpkins. So what made more sense is, well, hey, perhaps a less fear of God stamp of rating and more a where does Nathan fall in this movie, where does Reed fall in this movie, is a bit more of an interesting metric than purely, oh, look, they gave another movie a 7.
Exactly. But we're still going to follow the same format, style, scares, and substance.
But 1 through 10s, right?
1 through 10s now.
Yes.
So me on style, I give Krampus. I think it's a really effective film. I'm much more favorable to it on a second viewing than I was in the first viewing. And I'm going to give this a 4. Or sorry, sorry, I'm so used to that. So I know, old habits die hard.
Translate.
Yeah. I'm going to give this a 7.5 out of 10 for style.
Well, I didn't know we were doing halvesies now.
We're always doing halvesies.
Okay. For style, I was ready to be negative, and found myself what's going to be hilarious is if even with this new change, we all end up on
give it a 7
all the time. I'm going to give this, in terms of style, did I like it? I liked it a lot. I'm going to copy Reed and give it a 7.
So awesome. Awesome.
For scares, you know what? No, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to give style an 8 for me. For scares, I'm actually going to dial back and do more like a 6, because I do think its general tone is incredibly effective and creepy, but it's not like, it's more fairy tale scary than like horrific scary.
Agreed. And I'm going to join you in your 6 for scares. Yep.
Cool. And
for the same reasons. For substance? So for substance, again, I was more enamored with this film this second time around. I'm actually going to land at an 8 for substance. I don't feel like I need to qualify that very much because we've had a whole episode about it. So yeah.
I mean, it is clear, and I don't think it's just me. This movie stirred up a whole lot. I'm hesitant to go full 10, so I'm going to go with a 9 on the substance meter.
All right. Me too. So basically, I give it a straight up 7, like a 7.1, and Nathan, tell him what you give it.
Just 7.7. I actually tried not to do it.
You're
I guess
doubling
not
down
that
on
hard.
like the sevens.
Who knows? Whatever.
Yeah.
You guys know we like things.
That's true. So, but still, that just kind of differentiates for you.
I'll just round up to an 8. I'm going to round it up to an 8.
All right.
Because
all right. I'll round down to a 7. I give it a 7. You give it an 8.
Yes.
So yeah. Well, we hope you enjoyed this conversation. And please, this is our 3rd installment in #WhatTheDickens. This is our Christmas horror future. Next week is the big culmination. It's going to air on Christmas Day. So get ready, read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, the book, and Nathan and I will see you next week.
And
Nathan.
I don't know if you realize it. This is our penultimate 2018 episode.
I know. That's crazy.
Oh
nuts.
My gosh.
Nope, I can't even. That's crazy.
Do we
That's
need
crazy.
to announce to them that Christmas Carol is the last episode? Or
yeah, so not only does Christmas Carol fall on December 25th, but because of when the Tuesdays fall, it is also
the final last episode.
Yeah, it's the final episode of the year.
Oh, I meant last episode.
Oh. Well, now I feel sad.
Just kidding. 2019, here we come. What the Dickens?
So, Nathan, thank you as always for having this conversation with me, man. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for listening, as always. We will see you next week. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas, everybody. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And you can continue the conversation in a variety of ways. You can follow us on Twitter @TheFearOfGod. You can like and follow us on Facebook or join the Facebook Fear of God discussion group. You can follow us on Instagram @Fear of God Podcast. Go to morethanonelesson.com for show notes or to leave a comment on this post or any of the other official episode posts. Email us at fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. And last but not least, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.
I got 5 fish.
Oh my.
And you sent me
This has got to be, for me, the most impressive exterior of a maze I've seen so far. I mean, we have a lot more to visit, but this is incredible. And this guy right here.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, too.
Have you been really nice this year?
You got to ask my wife. I do not know. I do not know how that counts. Oh, Krampus knows. Okay, that's comforting. All right, Jason, are you first or am I first? Let's go together. Let's go together. Something is not. Oh, wow. Wow. No. 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 Oh my gosh. Oh my. Oh my. Oh my. All of these walls look like they give way. That one does. That one does. Okay. Okay, that one does. Maybe not all of them do, but that one did. Okay. Wow. Wow, man. That felt so good, that ice cherry thing. Oh no. I have a feeling more than one of these are real. No way, no. Oh my gosh. That is... No! Don't know. The size of it. Oh my goodness. Gingerbread! Gingerbread! Yes. There he is. Oh my God, you're incredible. Oh my God. Gingerbread man. Gingerbread. My hat, my friend, is drenched in sweat.